So here we are again. Hello and welcome, friends, validator community. I'm your host, Yuri Maybaum. We're now waiting a little bit for more people to join the conversation. But yeah, today I have the pleasure to welcome Jay from Sane Network to the show. Sane Network, as most of you guys know already, is an upcoming chain that will join the Cosmos very, very, very soon. And besides that the chain will join us very soon, the chain will also be very, very fast. But we will dive deeper into this in a second. First of all, hello, Jay. How are you doing? Good morning to San Francisco.
Hey, man. Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this will be like a very exciting chat. So, yeah, I think there are like so many things we have to discuss today, especially because your launch is so around the corner. But before we dive deeper into Sane Network, it would be like amazing if you could introduce yourself. So, yeah, how did you enter the space? Since when are you working on Say, and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. So great to meet you, everyone. My name is Jay. I'm one of the co-founders for Say Labs, and I lead engineering. So I personally got into crypto back in 2017. At that time, my roommate, he was going through Binance Launchpad. So we worked on a few different projects together. And afterwards, I ended up joining Robinhood as an engineer. So I spent almost 4 years at Robinhood, saw the company 10x, and I was an engineering lead when the entire GameStop crisis happened last year. I don't know if you were following along with it. It was not handled very well at all. I mean, for a little bit of context, Robinhood just there's an entire mania going on around buying stocks like GameStop, and Robinhood just turned off buys, and the entire world, at least everyone in the U.S. at least, became extremely frustrated with that. And yeah, I mean, that just really highlighted to me how whenever you have management making these opaque decisions, not really communicating why they're making these decisions, things can become very messy very quickly. And I mean, these problems around opaqueness, we've seen them kind of play out time and time again. We saw them with 3AC and FTX earlier this year. And I certainly don't think this is going to be the last time that we see them happening. And one thing that people don't realize at all is just how powerless you feel when you are an insider working at a place like Robinhood when one of these catastrophes is happening. Because you put your reputation, you put your career on the line, and it's just incredibly frustrating when management does not tell you anything about what's actually happening behind the scenes. And this is even worse when you're leading a team because people are coming to you with questions and you don't have any answers to be giving them. So after going through this experience myself, I became much more of an on-chain maxi. When things happen on-chain, they're inherently trustless, generally also transparent, and they would have resolved all the issues that Robinhood saw happening last year. So because of that, originally last year, my co-founder and I, we started building a decentralized Robinhood. And this led us down the path of investigating every layer one, every layer two, and all the other infrastructure we could use to build an exchange. And what we interestingly started seeing was the exchange trilemma. So between decentralization, scalability, and capital efficiency, every exchange out there right now is only able to get 2 out of the 3. So if you look at Uniswap v2, it only gets decentralization and scalability, but not capital efficiency. And if you look at Binance, it gets capital efficiency and scalability, but not decentralization. And we don't think that the solution here is to keep iterating on exchange mechanisms, right? Like that's what people have been doing for the past few years, and it hasn't worked out. Instead, we think the solution is to do a rewrite of the entire underlying infrastructure. And this is generally how innovation happens. If you're familiar with the idea of application infrastructure cycles, originally there's some infrastructure that comes out. This leads to new types of applications that find product market fit, which then leads to more specialized infrastructure getting created for these. So for example, in kind of Web 2, you had Oracle come out. This led to all of the new types of applications that we see in Web 1 and Web 2. And then a lot of these applications found product market fit. And then they started needing more specialized infrastructure. And now we have tools like Databricks Warehouse, which is tailor-made for AI and ML. And we think the exact same thing is going to be happening in crypto. We started off very general purpose with Ethereum. So this was new infrastructure that got created. It led to a lot of decentralized applications that were then spun up. Out of the ones that were created, exchanges found the most clear product market fit. And exchanges now need to have more specialized infrastructure to enable better performance, better usability, better scaling. So that's why we're building Say. We're building the best infrastructure for exchanges. And if we succeed in our mission, the decentralized exchange experience will be identical to that of the centralized exchange experience. So that's what we're building towards right now.
Nice, and yeah, I can very well remember the Robinhood drama slash GameStop drama. I think like everyone who started investing in 2020, 2021 experienced that very, very well. It also brought a lot of people into the crypto space, actually, but that's maybe a topic for another discussion. But yeah, anyway, let's stick to Sei. Let's talk a little bit about your project more deeply. You mentioned your thoughts that you had when launching and building Sei, but here is like my question, because like on your Twitter handle, for example, it says that the first sector-specific layer one giving exchanges an unfair advantage. So my question now is, what is this unfair advantage you're talking about here when building on Sei?
Absolutely. So yeah, let's do more of a technical deep dive. At a high level, Sei is a layer one chain with its own sovereign validator set. So we're not making use of any kind of shared security. We got started building with the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint Core, and we've been working very closely with Zaki. We've been working very closely with Marco to essentially push Cosmos and Tendermint to their absolute limits. So there's three new things that we've added in. The first thing that we've done is twin turbo consensus. So we took the parts of Tendermint and Cosmos that were inefficient, specifically block propagation and block processing, and we figured out how to make those a lot faster. And this helps decrease time to finality significantly. So the lower bound that we've seen with Sei is 300 millisecond time to finality. The lower bound on most other ecosystems is substantially higher than that. If you look at Solana, it's multiple seconds. If you look at Ethereum, it's multiple, I guess, over a minute to have actual finality. And this is true for most ecosystems out there that have any kind of probabilistic finality. Like you're not going to be able to have finality in less than a second. So Sei is just the fastest chain out there to finality, point blank. The second thing that we've done is parallelization. So we're the only Cosmos-based chain to be making use of any form of parallelization, and this has helped us significantly improve throughput. We're able to get over 22,000 orders per second that we can process in our internal testnet. And this, I guess for comparison, most Cosmos chains, they get less than 1,000 transactions per second they're able to process. And most of these super high performance chains like Solana or Near or Avalanche, they're seeing between 1 to 5,000 transactions per second that they're actually able to process on mainnet. So the performance that we've observed so far in our internal testnet is a magnitude better than what's out there right now. And the third thing that we've done is we've added in a native order matching engine. So this is a primitive that is built into the chain itself, and exchanges can use this to help them both build and scale. So this is something that helps prevent front running, that helps improve the market maker experience, and it greatly diminishes the time that it takes for an exchange to launch on Sei. So I mean, that's a super high level. We can do a deep dive into any of those things that I just mentioned. But yeah, the other thing that you were talking about is a sector specific chain. So I can also go into that right now. So at a high level, we observed that there were kind of two main extremes if you look at the distributions of layer ones right now. You have general purpose chains. So these are chains like Ethereum, Solana, and then on the other hand, you have application specific chains like Osmosis and DYDX34. Rather than going down either of these extremes, Sei is building right in the middle. So not quite general purpose, not quite application specific, but rather sector specific. And we think this unlocks the best both user experience, network effects, and also the best infrastructure. So if you look at application-specific chains, the main benefit with them is customizability, right? You can customize every single layer of the stack to help give your exchange or to give your infrastructure and your applications the best possible performance. And this is just definitionally true because if you're building the entire infrastructure around your application, then it's going to be better. On the other hand, with general purpose chains, you end up having social coordination. So every single team that is building an ecosystem, they're all part of the same community, and they all help that ecosystem grow faster than it would if it was just an individual chain by itself, only supporting one type of application. So with Sei's sector-specific approach, we have built the customized infrastructure that is better for exchanges, and we also support the smart contracts and the general purpose social coordination that is there with the general purpose chain. And we think this is going to be the best way to help any kind of ecosystem grow and also to offer the best performance for exchanges. And one of the very good things we get about this approach is credible neutrality. So any exchange that starts to build on Sei, it's not competing against the chain itself because the chain is only building the underlying infrastructure. Whereas if you have an application specific chain that then tries to become sector specific by trying to build an ecosystem on it, every single application that is building in that ecosystem is then going to have to compete against the core application that that chain itself is building. So that makes it a much more difficult value proposition because there no longer is that credible neutrality. So that's why we think that sector-specific approach where you're only building the infrastructure and growing out the community on top of it is the one that is the best approach to build out an ecosystem and also have the infrastructure that you need to help support these specialized types of applications.
Yeah, that's a super interesting thesis actually, because if you walk around in the space, you always see this app chains versus dApp chains. But yeah, actually, that's a very new approach. But I mean, naively asking here, if you allow, I mean, one of the main characteristics of Say is the transaction throughput. And I mean, that's cool for an exchange, but it's also like super attractive for other dApps. So if I have like a lending market, for instance, or even if it's just an NFT marketplace, it would be like a dream for me to have built this on top of a super scalable blockchain. So my question now is why, like, can you even position yourself in this corner, so to say? Because at some point people will think, hey, I don't care if they just build it for exchanges, but somehow it also makes sense for my project to launch on Say.
Yeah, that's the very interesting thing about exchanges, and also the type of infrastructure that we're building, which is that it makes sense for a lot of different projects to be launching on Say, not just exchanges. So when we originally got started, we were really highlighting the native order matching engine, and this led to the first 5 to 10 teams that were building on Say to be exclusively focused on making use of this order matching engine. Afterwards, we started seeing kind of an explosion of the different types of use cases that are building on Say. Whenever you have an exchange that is successful or like seems like it might be successful, this leads to a lot of other types of applications that are coming in because exchanges have very strong network effects. So at this point, there are over 100 projects that are building on Say ahead of the mainnet launch. And there was definitely a spike in new projects coming on after the Terra implosion happened because there were a lot of projects that were suddenly looking for a new home. And even after everything that's happened with FTX, we've also started noticing that there's been a lot of projects that are considering both the Cosmos ecosystem and also Say specifically, because they're looking for the best ecosystem to be building on. And they're objectively considering what the best technology is to build, rather than just trying to do things that are more short-term focused and kind of focusing on where's the place they can make the most money in the short term. So yeah, I mean, we definitely think that there's going to be every single type of DeFi focused application getting built on Say. And we've also started seeing things like NFT marketplaces and games also come over and start building on Say. One of the more unique applications that we've seen recently is Nitro. So Nitro is an optimistic rollup with the Solana C-level virtual machine that is using Say for settlement and data availability. So it's kind of like Arbitrum, except it's running the Solana execution environment and it's writing data to Say. And this is really interesting because a lot of Solana teams, they were interested in coming to the Cosmos ecosystem, but they did not want to take their Solana smart contracts, rewrite them in Cosmos, and then paid money to get them re-audited. So a lot of them are now very optimistic about coming over to Nitro because it enables them to launch in the Cosmos ecosystem without needing to rewrite their smart contract. So yeah, we're seeing a lot of different types of applications building in Say overall.
That's very interesting, and also like first time that I now hear from this project. So I think that's also like a very, very good sign in terms of interoperability. But we will talk about interoperability in a second when we talk more about why you chose Cosmos, and if we talk like about the aspect of the Cosmos IBC and stuff. But before we do that, so you mentioned already there are like maybe some terms and yeah, some terms and keywords that we really have to discuss. For example, you mentioned the pluralization aspect. Can we like talk a little bit about this, and if you could also introduce us to the Twin Turbo consensus, like all of these things, a little bit more detail, so we have like a better understanding of the characteristics of Say.
Absolutely. So Twin Turbo consensus is composed of two things. The first is intelligent block propagation, and the second one is optimistic block processing. So intelligent block propagation, the core idea behind that is Tendermint has a gossiping layer, which results in validators receiving transactions before a block is produced, right? So let's say that a user submits a transaction that gets gossiped to every other validator, every other full node in the network before the block producer is actually producing the block. So what typically ends up happening with Tendermint right now is that the block producer will produce a block that has all of the block contents, which are just transactions that every validator already has in their mempool, and then sends that over the network. So this is inefficient because validators already have these transactions and the block proposer is sending these transactions. And this introduces additional latency because now you need to send it over the network, and that might be another like 100 milliseconds, 150 milliseconds of latency from that. So instead of doing that, what we're doing with Say is because every validator already has these transactions in their mempool, the block producer will just send unique identifiers for every transaction, which is much smaller than what the actual transaction is. So in the block proposal message, they're going to include transaction hashes instead of the full transactions. And then they will just send that transaction, the block proposal over the network that is composed of these transaction hashes. And then each validator, assuming they have every single transaction in their mempool, can locally construct the block instead of needing to wait to receive it over the network. So that's the core idea behind intelligent block propagation. And in the happy path, the validator is just able to construct the block locally, and they save time. In the unhappy path, where the validator does not have every single transaction in their mempool, they just fall back to the previous approach that Tendermint currently uses, which is that the block proposer will, after sending that block proposal message that has all the transaction hashes, that block proposer will then send the entire block as well, and the validator can just wait to receive that. So that's intelligent block propagation. Any questions from your side around that so far?
Yeah, I was just waiting for the for the next topic, but yeah, like actually here it makes sense to ask something because that's like very fitting with a question that I've saved for later. But actually, I mean that sounds pretty cool, but it also sounds that for me that there might be like some challenges validators run in. So all of what you just mentioned is will it be like harder for a validator that is like used to all the Cosmos SDK chains and like runs validators and let's say Osmosis, Juno, and so on and so forth? Will it be for him like more trickier to run infrastructure for Sai as well? Because for example, we are also about to launch a Solana validator, and the challenges there are like very different. So would love to pick your brain on this as well.
Yeah, so it should not be any more difficult to run a validator on Say than it will be on any other Cosmos chain, such as Osmosis. In terms of the hardware requirements, we are not requiring any type of specialized hardware. For example, in Solana's case, they require you to be using GPUs. In Say's case, the requirements are the same as what Osmosis has right now. So nothing fundamentally different around that. The main thing that's different about Say is that we've worked with Zaki and Marco to change the Tendermint configurations so that we have more aggressive timeouts. So normally with Tendermint, once there's 2/3 consensus, then you wait a certain amount of time for other validators in the network to be able to vote on the block that was proposed. And this helps ensure that every validator has close to basically as high uptime or I guess voting percentage as they possibly can. And this isn't really necessary to do in terms of chain security or in terms of chain liveness. Once you have 2/3 consensus, then it's technically okay to move on to the next block. And then validators that submitted their transactions or their votes a little bit late, that doesn't really matter for the progression of the network. So that's the biggest thing that Zaki and Marco kind of emphasized to us when we were getting started with this, that there's nothing fundamentally unsafe about this, and it just requires a mindset shift that validators are currently having in terms of what voting percentages are considered acceptable. So that's why in Say's case, like that's going to be the main difference. There will be lower percentages of, there will be more missed blocks from validators, and that's okay. So that is the kind of main trade-off that is being made in terms of the Tendermint configurations to enable better time to finality, better performance for the chain overall. And it's not going to be negative for validators at all.
That's very, very interesting. So you basically say it's okay for validators if they, so to say, struggle to keep up with the speed for the sake of the broader vision of the project.
Correct. And we're also going to be tuning the timeout configurations. Like that is something that could be changed depending on if validators are having a harder time keeping up. So currently we're in Atlantic 1 testnet, and we've observed that overall the chain is progressing, completely fine. We're also going to be launching an Atlantic 2 testnet in the next couple of months. And that testnet will be having more fine-tuned configurations based off the validator set that is over there. So this is going to be something that the validators are going to need to get involved in fine-tuning on mainnet as well. But it's definitely something that the validators will not be getting negatively impacted by.
Speaking of testnet, so when we started, shortly before we started this episode, we got some questions on Twitter, which is pretty straightforward. When mainnet?
A classic question. Yeah, so we started, at this point, Say is code complete. We started our audit, I think 3 weeks ago now. In terms of when we're going to be launching on mainnet, we want that audit to wrap up, and then afterwards, we're probably going to be launching around maybe a few weeks to a month after that. So realistically, right now, it's looking to be late Q1 of 2023. So I mean, time of recording right now, this is December 15th.
15.
So probably 2-3 months in the future.
Nice. Yeah, really can't wait for it. And also with all the other aspects that also come with the launch, you mentioned that you would also basically offer like kind of a bridge for Solana projects to enter the Cosmos indirectly as well. So I don't know, maybe it's also just because both ecosystems offer like such a high throughput time, but is there like could you also like argue that like I would like to I would like to dive deeper into the similarities between these two ecosystems, Sei and Solana. So where does this strong connection come from?
I mean, we both originally started trying to solve the same problem, which is building the best infrastructure for exchanges. We just approached it in different formats, right? Solana built a completely general purpose chain. Sei is building the sector specific chain. And in terms of what the product that leads to, Solana is a completely general purpose chain. Sei is a chain that has the native order matching engine that is built into the chain itself that helps exchanges scale. So I think the similarities are because we were originally trying to solve a similar problem. Our approaches are completely different based off the sector specific versus the general purpose approach. And we fundamentally do not think that an exchange can scale on a general purpose chain. Like every single example of that so far has not worked out. And that's because people keep iterating on these exchange mechanisms, whereas we don't think that's a solution to the exchange dilemma. We think that a fundamental rewrite of the underlying infrastructure and having logic in the chain itself to support better exchange performance is what is going to help be the solution over here.
Nice. And I think, and also because we just talked about Solana, I mean, also Solana has a lot of problems in regards of uptime and network holds. So my question here for you is like back to Sei, so to say, you are like using a completely different architecture. You're using the Cosmos SDK. So why did you decide to do so? Why did you decide to say, hey, we want to be part of the Cosmos ecosystem? And also would be cool to understand how many validators you will support in the active set.
Absolutely. Yeah, so originally we were trying to build the decentralized Robinhood. This led to us realizing that the opportunities to build a layer one instead. So then we started looking into how to build a layer one, or like how to build the underlying infrastructure. And there fundamentally ended up being 3 different approaches we noticed. The first approach was to build a rollup, and currently the only place where like rollups are production ready is Ethereum, right? So building a rollup on Ethereum, we just don't think that that can scale. And the fundamental limitation over there, at least as of right now, is based off of the amount of data that is being written to the chain. So with a rollup, you need to take every single transaction that happened on the rollup, compress it, and then write it to the base layer, which in the case of Ethereum, that costs 6 bytes or 6 gas per byte of data that is written on chain. So every single block has a target size of 15 million gas. And we did the math, and for very simple transactions, such as just sending Ether from one account to another, that ends up being an upper bound of 6,000 transactions per second, assuming the entire Ethereum L1 block is used for a rollup. And realistically, there's going to be other stuff happening in that L1 block as well. There's going to be Uniswap, there's going to be OpenSea, there's going to be all the other projects that are successful on Ethereum taking up block space as well. So that's why we think that there's a fundamental limitation of building a rollup that would be trying to solve this problem on Ethereum. The second approach then is some kind of shared security system. So this could be making use of consumer chain. It could also be making use of like an outline subnet, Polkadot, Parachain. And we think that this approach is better. Like we get to control the entire execution layer, but we don't get to control the consensus layer. So if we want to have faster time to finality, if we want to change the way the consensus works, such as what we've done with Twin Turbo, we don't have that level of customization, which is why we decided to build a completely sovereign chain. Now, in terms of sovereign chains, there's basically 2 approaches out there right now. One is to do everything from scratch, and the other approach is to make use of the Cosmos SDK. And we think the Cosmos SDK is a far superior approach to get a chain built for multiple reasons. First of all, it's very easy and quick to get something spun up, and then afterwards you can iterate on the parts around the specific functionality and performance improvements that you need. So that's been a huge win for us because we've been able to get the vanilla chain up and running very quickly. Then afterwards, we added in the native order matching engine. That didn't take too long either. Then afterwards, we made all of the consensus level tweaks, parallelization tweaks that led to better performance. The second thing that's really nice about the Cosmos SDK is it comes with IBC compatibility, which makes it very easy for you to have multi-chain communication from the get-go. And especially if you're trying to build a trading-focused ecosystem, it's very nice to have an easy way to bring on liquidity from other ecosystems right from the start. So those reasons end up being very valuable. And like the modularity of the Cosmos SDK, I think is one of the biggest selling points around it. And it's also extremely battle tested. So you were mentioning Solana having these liveness issues before. The biggest reason that Solana has had these major outages is just because of bugs, either at the execution layer or the consensus layer. And in the case of, say, like, because we're making use of Tendermint and because we're making use of Cosmos SDK, which are both extremely battle tested at this point, like even when Terra went down, the Cosmos SDK and Tendermint core, they were completely reliable. So because of that, we are much more optimistic about using this battle tested technology rather than building everything completely from scratch, like a lot of other chains have done.
Yeah, this makes total sense, and I think battle tested is the keyword here, and also like this network effect that the Cosmos ecosystem has proven so far over and over again. I know that like other chains, like for example Polkadot, finding it hard to develop a similar network effect, even though Cosmos did not really hit the news that big. As for example Solana or Avalanche in this bull market, but we have seen more and more chains joining the Cosmos. So that was like pretty cool. But let's talk a little bit about what you just mentioned. You basically started to describe this app chain versus step chain thesis. And you also described these huge advantages when launching your own Cosmos chain, for example, customization. But my question, like, maybe that's a very broad question here, but let's say I'm an exchange. I could also go ahead and say, okay, I'm just copy pasting your consensus mechanism and everything. I basically copy say, and then I'm just launching my own chain in the same design and the same throughput. So let's say I'm Kraken. I want to get decentralized, and I say I'm building a blockchain, like say in the same design, but just for my own exchange. Why would you recommend them to still launch on Say instead of moving forward that way?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things about building any kind of open source technology is that the technology that you build does not end up being the long-term moat for why your project is successful, right? Like the reason Bitcoin is successful, example, is not because of the Bitcoin source code. Same thing with Ethereum. It's because of the ecosystem and the community that they built up around the project. If I were to go and fork Bitcoin and try to make my own Bitcoin network today, it would not be remotely as successful as the main Bitcoin network is. And same thing for Ethereum, same thing for like any major ecosystem that is done well. So it's never the technical advantages that lead to a long-term moat because anyone can copy those, especially if it's open source. It fundamentally ends up being the community, the ecosystem, and the network effects of building as part of that. So if you're going to build a standalone exchange and just fork, say, like you can absolutely do that. It's just going to be much harder for you to build an ecosystem and get people onto your chain and start getting usage. And I mean, fundamentally, what we've observed is that building a layer one chain and building an exchange, these are two of the hardest problems in crypto. And if you're an exchange that forks today and tries to do both of them, it's going to be a very difficult job to do both of them very well. So in our opinion, it makes more sense for exchanges to focus really on building the best exchange mechanisms and to focus on acquiring users on existing infrastructure. And then it makes sense for other teams to be focusing only on building the underlying layer one infrastructure. And I mean, this modularization is something that we see just constantly happening in Web 2 and also Web 3 at this point. Like even in the way that like the Ethereum roadmap is designed, like there's this massive focus on modularization where every single part of the stack, every single part of the mechanism for like how block proposals, for example, work, like they try to modularize it as much as possible. And I think long term, that is the way that like things are going to be working in crypto all around.
With that in mind, I mean, you said there are like two super difficult things to do is like launching an own chain and launching an exchange. Well, there's a project that is doing precisely that, so to say, DYDX. So what were your thoughts on that when they decided to do so? And I mean, we had them on the show here as well, and they stressed this customization aspect. They care about that so much, and that is super important for mass adoption. So what are your thoughts on this?
So that was honestly very interesting because we started building, say, like substantially earlier this year, and then DYDX announced in June. So initially, people were very confused about why we were building the Cosmos ecosystem, because the biggest question was like, where are the users? Where's the liquidity going to come from? And then there was a complete mindset shift as soon as DYDX came. Like DYDX brought a lot more legitimacy to building your own Cosmos chain. And suddenly there was no longer that question around like, oh, where are the users going to come from? Because like it became very clear that like DYDX being part of the ecosystem is going to be extremely valuable to that. So I think it was extremely beneficial for the Cosmos system overall when DYDX made that announcement. Like we are not feeling bad about DYDX coming over here at all. In terms of their infrastructure, their approach is definitely different than our approach for multiple reasons. Like the first approach, the first thing is they're trying to vertically control everything. And they're not, at least based off what I know so far, they're not trying to build an ecosystem of applications on top. Like they're just trying to control everything that happens on the DYDX chain. So that ends up being much more of the app-specific approach. Our approach is a sector-specific approach. So we think that the sector-specific approach is going to be the one that allows you to build a better ecosystem and a better community. The second thing that's different about them, just from a pure technological standpoint, is they're making use of decentralized off-chain order books. So in our case, would say everything happens on-chain. The order book lives completely on-chain. For a limit order to be added to the order book, it needs to be included as part of a block. It needs to go through consensus. Then afterwards, during the execution phase is when it gets added to the order book. In their case, they have all of this happening in memory on all of the decentralized validators. So it's a different approach. We'll see how that works out. I think that the bigger concern that I have with that approach is just it leads to more opportunities for MEV, because now the block producer and the validators, they have a copy of the order book in their own memory. And they can claim that they received transactions or did not receive transactions without anyone really having a way to verify that. So that does increase the scope of MEV, because let's say that like I submit a transaction that's very profitable, and then a validator sees that transaction, and then instead of taking my transaction, they just include their own identical transaction, and then that's what gets proposed in the block. And then they say that, oh, I never received your transaction because of network latency or something. So that's the main thing that I'd be concerned about. But overall, I think that they have exceptional team, and I also don't necessarily think, like, depending on their validator set, MEV related things might not end up being that big of an issue for them either.
Yeah, interesting that you mentioned MEV. So, I mean, what you just described is like a classic and very common problem on Ethereum, so to say. It was like much more of a problem when we were like in a bull run, but now MEV is I wouldn't call it a problem, but a thing that exists in the space. So my question for you now is, how is Sei tackling the problem of MEV? Because at the end of the day, MEV, for example, could also impact tokenomics quite significantly. So, for example, that validators share MEV revenue cuts with their fellow stakers, and especially when you're launched, when more and more exchanges are launching on Sei, MEV could be like a pretty big thing on Sei. So, what are you doing about MEV? Do you have it on your radar already, or is this like up to come?
Yeah, so this is definitely top of mind for us. The overarching kind of approach that we have for MEV is we want to stop the bad MEV and redistribute the good MEV. So bad MEV would be front running. And for the listeners, an example of front running would be, let's say I submit a transaction to buy an asset for $10 and I accept up to, let's say, 5% slippage. Then Yuri, you're a validator, you see my transaction coming in. So you're the block proposer. And before you see my transaction, so instead of just accepting my transaction right away, what you do is you place a market order to buy that same asset for $10. And then you place a limit order to sell that asset for $10.50. And then afterwards, my transaction for $10 with 5% slippage is accepted. So what ends up happening is you buy the asset for $10 and then you're able to sell it for $10.50. So you make a 5% profit completely riskless because you're the block producer. We think this is really predatory. We think this is bad, and we think this should be stopped entirely. And we actually do that for order book related transactions within a block. And this is through frequent batch auctions. So the native order matching engine that is there on Sei right now, the way that it works is at the end of a block, it will aggregate every single market order and then execute all of those market orders at the same price. So let's say that there's two orders on the order book, one for $10, one for $11, and then two market orders come in, right? If two market orders come in, what would normally happen with sequential execution is the first one will get executed, let's say $10, the second one will get executed $11. With frequent batch auctions, both of them will get executed at the same price of $10.50. So because of that, the ordering of transactions within a block no longer matters for anything related to the order book. So that's the first thing that we have done. Now, the second thing is there's also MEV that is unavoidable and generally considered good. So this would be ARBs, this would be liquidations. And I mean, listeners can just think of this as there's money to be made for whoever is the first one to submit that transaction. So what ends up happening in other ecosystems like Solana, where there isn't a mempool, is people try to spam the network to try to win that opportunity. Instead of having that happen, the other approach is to have some kind of off-chain auction happen. So this is similar to the Flashbots approach that is there on Ethereum. This is similar to what Skip and Mekatech are enabling in the Cosmos ecosystem, where people will be able to submit transactions to this off-chain node, and then whoever wins that bid, they will win that opportunity. And what ends up happening is that, let's say there's a $100 opportunity. At the start, maybe you need to submit a $5 bid to win that opportunity. In the longer term, there will be more people that are monitoring the network when there's more money to be made. So the competition increases. And when competition increases, the value of the bid to win that opportunity will also increase. So instead of a $5 bid to win that opportunity, you might need to make a $99 bid to win that $100 opportunity. So because of that, like the bids will then get redistributed to the network, so to validators, to delegators, and that is where value accrual for basically the network will happen. And then for the people that are like searchers, they will be able to, they're essentially going to have to try to identify the new opportunities if they want to make larger amounts of money through this mechanism.
You just mentioned Skip and Mekatech, and according to your good versus bad MEV thesis, I also believe that you decided to enable Skip, right, instead of Mekatech on Sei.
I mean, we are definitely communicating with the Skip team. We're not like, first of all, it's up to the validators to decide which party they want to work with. So like we have very little control over that. We just want to make sure that the infrastructure is set up to enable any type of validator to be using any third party that they would prefer to be working with.
Okay, so this is something that will be decided on the validator level instead of the protocol level.
Correct.
Okay, yeah, that's actually pretty cool. Cool to know. But yeah, now we have like touched based on a lot of things. Now, like I would like to talk about something that is more obvious, especially after these rough times in terms of Terra Luna and the FTX fall down. So there was like a lot of confusion and yeah, and a lot of fear around perpetuals again. So like do you have some thoughts on this? What will happen next after this FTX fall down? Do you believe that people will be more interested in using decentralized exchanges and decentralized protocols such as DYDX, but also exchanges that will launch, I'd say?
Yeah, so everything that happened with FTX, it was very bad for the crypto industry overall. Thankfully at Sei Labs, we were directly not affected because we didn't have any money on FTX. The second order effects of it are also interesting because one of the second order effects is that like there's just like less people that are interested in doing stuff in crypto overall. But the second one of the other things we've noticed is that now builders are much more thoughtful about where they want to be building. And whenever there's any kind of crypto winter like this, there's a lot more people who become very objective in their decision making. Like, what is the best exchange or what is the best infrastructure to be building on from a technical standpoint, rather than going to whatever ecosystem they can go to make a quick buck right away. So we've definitely noticed that there's been more teams that are open to just objectively considering the best infrastructure to be building on. In terms of people making use of decentralized exchanges, we absolutely think that this solidifies the value proposition for making use of any kind of decentralized exchange. If you're doing things on chain in a decentralized fashion, inherently trustless, generally transparent as well, if you're using any kind of chain with a that isn't known for its like privacy characteristics. So because of that, we think that yes, it absolutely does increase the value proposition, and it will result in more activity happening on chain in the future.
Nice. Yeah, makes total sense. Yeah, like I just hope that it will happen like this, to be honest, because another fall down would be pretty brutal. But yeah, let's talk about something that you guys announced at Cosmoverse, actually. I remember that one very well. So you announced an ecosystem and liquidity fund with $50 million. So can you walk us through here? who is like supporting that fund? What happened since you announced it in September? Yeah, would be great to have an overview here as well.
Yeah. So at this point, say like the 100 teams that have been building on Say, we have not given away any money in grants to them to get them to start building. But one of the questions that has repeatedly come up from teams that have considered building on Say is like, how do we get either investors in the longer term, or how do we get liquidity in the longer term for any exchanges that we build? So that is the primary purpose of this fund. It is commitments from market makers and from investors that they're going to be putting money into projects that are building on Say. So this is $50 million that has been set aside to, first of all, invest into projects that are building as part of the Say ecosystem. And this is from investors such as Multicoin that are, I guess, world renowned. And secondly, it's from market makers that are committing to be deploying capital onto exchanges that are building on Say. So this is going to make it much easier for any projects to at least have the, I guess, I can't think of the right word here, but like they're going to at least know that there will be people to help them out with both investment and liquidity opportunities in the future.
Nice. Yeah. But yeah, interesting that that you haven't like started distributing it.
So
But
yeah, I mean,
yeah.
there's definitely conversations happening between projects that are building on Say and people that have committed to the ecosystem and liquidity fund. But the bigger thing that I want to highlight is like we're not going to be using this to give away grants like other ecosystems do. And all the teams that have been building on Say, like they have done so in spite of not receiving any money in grants, which means that it's largely due to the technology and not because of, there's ecosystems, for example, like teams come over to just receive the money and then they might not build anything, might not launch anything significant. I think in Say's case, the technology does speak for itself, and that is why a lot of people are coming over and starting to build on Say.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point here, because we have seen, I think this was like a hype that just emerged after the Avalanche Rush program in 2021, that every ecosystem, when we were like also in a crazy bull run, when every ecosystem launched a super mega hundreds of millions worth ecosystem or liquidity fund, but most of them failed with that. I also remember the Harmony ecosystem fund. But yeah, you don't hear anything from it anymore. So I really like that that approach that you are taking here. Before I take more questions from the community, so we have some questions for you here already. I want to encourage you, if you have any questions for Jay, please let us know in the chat, and I will pick them up. But yeah, speaking before we are picking up these questions, I would like to ask one more questions about the team. So you said that there is a lot of interest into launching on Say. So about how many teams are we talking about here? Can you give us like maybe some examples, and what will the situation look like approximately in early 2023?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's over 100 projects that have committed to building on Say at this point. I think in terms of announcements that we've made, we've already announced over 30 or 40 of them on our Twitter. So if you want to see a list of the teams, it's there on our Twitter. It's also there on our ecosystem page on saynetwork.io. I mean, the main categories of projects, there's a lot of exchanges that are getting built that are making use of the native order matching engine. So every single type of exchange vertical you can think of, people are building along that. So like spot exchanges, perps exchanges, options related things, prediction markets as well. So that is one category of projects. Then there's more infrastructure facing projects. So things such as wallets, bridges, the rollup that I mentioned before as well, Nitro. So I think that there's this other category that is also very interesting. And now we're starting to see more native applications getting built on top of the ecosystem as well. So people making use of the native order matching engine to help create middleware. Because the native order matching engine is extremely flexible, like you don't need to actually even be trading tokens on it. And you can define any custom functionality you want whenever order placement happens, whenever order matching happens, and whenever order settlement happens. So yeah, different teams are experimenting with that and planning on launching. I guess they're going to be publicly announcing over the next couple of months. So in terms of what will be there when early Q1 of next year, I think that there will be a lot of projects that launch on the testnet. And there will be, right now there's an incentivized testnet that is running. So there's rewards for anyone that is making use of the existing projects that have launched already. And if you make use of any of these projects, you will receive incentivized testnet rewards. We set aside 1% of the overall token supply for these incentivized testnet rewards, which is absolutely massive. So anyone that gets involved with that, they'll be able to receive these token rewards once mainnet launches. And then mainnet launch, as mentioned before, will be sometime Q1 of next year.
Yeah, this actually goes hand in hand with the first question for you here. What are the benefits of doing the SAY testnet and join the ambassador program?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest thing is just to get involved in the SAY community and to help be someone who is early in the ecosystem, help stress test the network and just try everything out. In terms of the benefits for participating in the SAY testnet, 1% of the overall token supply is being set aside. So absolutely massive rewards for anyone that is helping participate, getting involved in the community, and also helping to stress test the network.
Yeah. So, and are there like any good links you can refer to get started, so we can link them in the comment section or so? So, where can people
Yeah.
get started?
Yeah, so I think the best resource is going to be our Twitter. So that's SEINETWORK. That's the Twitter handle. If you go there, we have a bunch of resources around how to join Discord, where to go to our docs, where the website is, etc. So that would be the best place to get started with SAY.
So, guys, you heard it here first, and of course, after the stream, we will insert the link to SAY's Twitter account. Last question for you, also from the community. I love these when when questions actually, but yeah, when tokenomics, sir, Jay.
Yeah, so we'll be announcing the tokenomics closer to mainnet launch. The stuff that we've announced publicly has been around the incentivized testnet. There's also an airdrop that will be happening. Specific details around that. I think we've tweeted a couple of things on Twitter, so you can go through our history to see which projects or which ecosystems will be receiving airdrops. And beyond that, more specifics will be announced in the next couple of months.
So another airdrop in the Cosmos ecosystem. This would actually be a very, very lovely and sweet start into the new year. And with that being said, Jay, I think we touched based on so many projects. We are also getting closer to an hour. But yeah, very, very excited about SAY coming to the Interchain. And I thank you so much for taking the time, for guiding us through your project. And yeah, good luck with everything. And yeah, hope to see you on the show very, very soon again.
Awesome. Thank you for having me on, sir. And thanks for listening, everyone.